Eleanor Chen had been teaching for 15 years, and she thought she'd seen everything. But something about the boy in the back row caught her attention on that first Monday of September. He walked into her 7th grade English class wearing a jacket that was too small for him, the sleeves stopping well above his wrists. His backpack looked like it had survived a war, held together with duct tape and determination. When he sat down, Eleanor noticed his sneakers, the kind you'd find at a dollar store with the sole separating from the shoe on one side. But it wasn't his clothes that made her pause. It was his eyes. While most 12-year-olds shuffled in half asleep, complaining about summer being over, this boy looked around the classroom like he was entering a sacred space. He ran his fingers along the spine of every book on the shelf near his desk, reading each title with quiet hunger. Eleanor started her usual first-day routine. She asked students to introduce themselves and share their favorite book. When it came to the boy in the back, he stood up slowly. "I'm David Rodriguez," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And my favorite book is The Old Man and the Sea. I read it 3 times. Eleanor raised her eyebrows. That wasn't typical 7th grade reading material. "Where did you find that one, David?" "The library downtown," he answered. "I go there after school most days. They let me stay until closing." As the period continued, Eleanor watched David closely. When she asked questions about literature, his hand shot up faster than anyone else's. He didn't just give simple answers either. He talked about themes, character development, and symbolism with an understanding that belonged to someone much older. During independent reading time, Eleanor walked around the classroom. Most kids were on their phones or doodling in notebooks. David sat perfectly still, reading the same battered paperback she'd seen him pull from his backpack, a water-damaged copy of To Kill a Mockingbird with pages falling out. When the bell rang, students rushed out like prisoners granted parole. David took his time, carefully placing his single pencil and the falling-apart book into his backpack. Eleanor called out to him, "David, can you stay back for just a minute?" The boy's face went pale. That look, Eleanor knew it well. He thought he was in trouble. "You're not in any trouble," she said quickly, offering a warm smile. "I just wanted to say that your comments today were really impressive. You clearly love reading." David's shoulders relaxed a little. "Yes, ma'am. Books are—" He paused, searching for words. "They're like windows, you know? I can see a whole different world through them." Eleanor felt something tighten in her chest. She'd grown up poor herself, in a cramped apartment with 5 siblings. She remembered what it felt like to escape into books when real life felt too heavy. "I'm going to assign our first-class novel this week," Eleanor said, watching his reaction carefully. "Have you read The Giver by Lois Lowry?" David shook his head, but his eyes lit up with interest. "No, ma'am. But I'd like to." "Good, because that's what we'll be reading." "The thing is," Eleanor paused, "the school had cut the book budget 2 years ago. Parents were now expected to buy their children's novels. She'd already received 3 emails from concerned parents about the cost. The thing is, families need to purchase the book themselves. It's about $15 at the bookstore downtown." She watched David's face fall. The light in his eyes dimmed like someone had turned down a switch. He nodded slowly, looking at the floor. "Okay," he said quietly. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen." He walked out before she could say anything else. Eleanor stood there in her empty classroom, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, and felt that familiar anger rising in her chest. $15. For most families, that was nothing. For some, it was groceries for 2 days. That evening, Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about David. She made dinner, helped her own teenage daughter with homework, but her mind kept drifting back to that boy's face when she mentioned the cost of the book. She'd seen that expression before, shame mixed with resignation. The look of a kid who was used to being left out. After her daughter went to bed, Eleanor walked to her home office. 3 walls were covered floor to ceiling with books. She'd been collecting them since college, some new, many used, all precious to her. She ran her fingers along the spines, remembering how each book had made her feel, the worlds they'd opened up. She pulled out her copy of The Giver. It was a newer edition in perfect condition. Then she kept looking. The Outsiders. A Wrinkle in Time. Where the Red Fern Grows. Holes. Classic young adult novels that had changed her life when she was David's age. Eleanor made a decision that night, one that would cost her about $80, money she'd been saving for a new winter coat. She chose 6 books from her collection, plus bought 2 new copies of The Giver the next day, one for David, and one for any other student who might need it but wouldn't speak up. The following morning, Eleanor arrived at school an hour early. She wrapped the books in simple brown paper and tied them with twine. On a note card, she wrote a message in her neat handwriting. For a mind that's meant to soar, these books are yours to keep forever. Read them, love them, and pass the magic along someday. She placed the package on David's desk and waited, her heart beating faster than she expected. Was this too much? Would he be embarrassed? Would other students make fun of him? The classroom slowly filled with students. David was one of the last to arrive, sliding into his seat with his eyes down. Then he saw the package. He looked around, confused, checking if he was at the wrong desk. Eleanor pretended to organize papers at her desk, watching from the corner of her eye. David carefully untied the twine and unwrapped the paper. When he saw the stack of books, his hands started shaking. He picked up the note card and read it once, then twice. His jaw clenched, and Eleanor could see him fighting back tears. He looked up and met her eyes across the classroom. She gave him the smallest nod, a silent message. This is just between us. David opened the first book, The Giver, and pressed his hand against the fresh pages. Then he did something that would stay with Eleanor forever. He brought the book up to his face and breathed in deeply, the way someone might smell flowers or fresh bread. He was breathing in possibility. The other students filed in, chattering and laughing, completely unaware that something significant had just happened in the back corner of the room. Eleanor started her lesson, but she felt different, lighter somehow. She'd been teaching for 15 years, and sometimes she wondered if she was really making a difference. The pay was terrible. The hours were long. The bureaucracy was exhausting. Some days she thought about quitting and doing something easier. But watching David carefully stack those books on his desk, treating each one like a treasure, Eleanor remembered why she'd become a teacher in the first place. Not to get rich, not for the glory, but for moments like this, for the chance to tell a kid who felt invisible that he mattered, that his dreams were worth investing in. She had no way of knowing it then, but that simple gift of books would set off a chain of events that would change both of their lives forever. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest ripples. David opened his new copy of The Giver and began to read, and Eleanor began her lesson, and the world kept spinning. But something had shifted. A seed had been planted, and seeds, when given the right care, have a way of growing into something beautiful. The change in David wasn't immediate, but Eleanor noticed it growing day by day, like watching a plant respond to sunlight. He started arriving to class 5 minutes early, using the time to read before the chaos of other students filled the room. During discussions about The Giver, his contributions became more confident. He wasn't just raising his hand anymore. He was debating with other students, defending his interpretations with passion. But Eleanor also noticed other things. David wore the same 3 shirts in rotation, each one getting more faded as the weeks passed. He never bought lunch from the cafeteria, instead eating a small sandwich he brought from home, always just peanut butter on white bread. On cold days, he still wore that too small jacket, his wrists exposed to the autumn chill. One October afternoon, Eleanor was walking to her car when she saw David sitting on the bus stop bench outside school, reading one of the books she'd given him. The bus came and went. He didn't get on. Another bus arrived 15 minutes later. He let that one pass too. Eleanor walked over. "David, everything okay? Did you miss your bus?" He looked up, startled. "Oh no, ma'am. I'm just finishing this chapter." "I've got time. Where do you live?" Eleanor asked gently. "Parkview Apartments." The ones by the old factory. Eleanor knew those apartments. They were 40 minutes away by bus in the roughest part of town. "That's quite a commute. Do you do this every day?" David nodded. "My mom works 2 jobs, so I take the city bus. It's okay, though. Gives me more time to read." He said it like it was nothing, like spending 3 hours a day on public transportation was just a normal part of being 12 years old. Eleanor felt that familiar tightness in her chest again. "Well, don't miss too many buses," she said, keeping her tone light. "Your mom will worry." As she drove home that evening, Eleanor couldn't shake the image of David sitting alone at that bus stop, lost in a book while the world rushed past him. When she got home, she made a phone call to Linda Martinez, the school counselor and her closest friend on staff. "Linda, I need to ask you something confidentially. Do we still have that program? The one that helps families with supplies and things?" Linda sighed. "We do, but the fund is almost empty. Budget cuts, you know. We can help maybe 5 kids this year." "Why? Who are you thinking about?" "David Rodriguez, 7th grade. He's brilliant, Linda, absolutely brilliant. But he's struggling." "I know the family," Linda said quietly. "Single mom, 3 kids. She's working herself to death trying to keep them fed and housed. The dad left 2 years ago, hasn't sent a dime. I can see what strings I can pull." 3 days later, Linda stopped by Eleanor's classroom during her planning period. "I got David enrolled in the free lunch program," she said. "His mom was too proud to apply, but I explained it wouldn't affect anything else." She finally agreed. Eleanor felt relief wash over her. "Thank you." "There's more," Linda continued. "I found some donated winter coats in storage. I'm going to make sure David gets one that actually fits. And Eleanor?" Linda put her hand on her friend's shoulder. "What you did, giving him those books? That matters, more than you know." As November arrived and the temperature dropped, Eleanor noticed David wearing a new coat, well, new to him, that actually covered his arms. And at lunch, she spotted him in the cafeteria, eating a hot meal instead of his usual peanut butter sandwich. He was still sitting alone, reading while he ate, but at least he was eating real food. Eleanor started staying after school twice a week, offering optional study sessions for any student who wanted extra help. She advertised it to the whole class, but she designed it for David. She knew he couldn't afford tutoring, and she knew he had time to kill before his bus anyway. David showed up every single time. So did 3 other students, which was perfect. It didn't single him out. During those sessions, Eleanor saw David's mind work in ways that amazed her. He made connections between books and real life that she'd never considered. He asked questions that challenged her own understanding. "Mrs. Chen," he said one afternoon, "why do you think schools in rich neighborhoods get better funding than schools in poor neighborhoods? Shouldn't it be the opposite? Shouldn't the kids who need the most help get the most resources?" Eleanor paused, choosing her words carefully. "That's a really important question, David, and you're right. Logically, it should work that way. But our system doesn't always work logically. It's something people are fighting to change. Have you ever thought about fighting to change it?" he asked, his dark eyes serious. "Every day," Eleanor admitted. "Every single day." By December, something wonderful and unexpected happened. David started helping other students. A boy named Tommy was struggling with reading comprehension, getting frustrated and giving up. Without being asked, David started sitting with him during study sessions, patiently explaining things in a way that made sense to Tommy. "You're a natural teacher," Eleanor told David one afternoon after the other students had left. David smiled, a rare full smile that transformed his usually serious face. "I learned from the best," he said simply. Eleanor had to turn away and pretend to organize papers on her desk because her eyes were filling with tears. These were the moments that made teaching worthwhile. Not the test scores or the evaluations, but this, watching a struggling kid become confident enough to help others. As winter break approached, Eleanor noticed David's mood shift. He became quieter again, less eager to participate. During study session on the last day before break, she asked him to stay back. "You seem worried about something," she said gently. "Want to talk about it?" David hesitated, then words tumbled out in a rush. "We might have to move. My mom lost one of her jobs, and she's not sure we can pay rent. She's looking for something else, but..." He trailed off, looking at the floor. "Where would you go?" Eleanor asked. "Maybe to my aunt's place. She lives in Riverside. That's 2 hours away. I'd have to change schools." Eleanor's heart sank. She'd seen this too many times. Promising students disappearing mid-year because their families couldn't make rent. "David, I'm sorry. That must be really scary." "I don't want to leave," he said, and his voice cracked. "I like it here. I like your class. And I've never had a teacher who..." He stopped, struggling to find words. "Who saw me before. Really saw me." Eleanor put her hand on his shoulder. "Listen to me. Whatever happens, you keep reading. You keep learning. You're going somewhere, David. I can see it as clearly as I see you standing here. Maybe you stay, maybe you go, but either way, you're going to do amazing things." "How do you know?" he asked, looking up at her with eyes too old for his age. "Because you're hungry for knowledge in a way that can't be taught. That comes from inside. And people with that kind of hunger, they find a way. David left that day carrying not just his backpack but hope. Eleanor went home and did something she rarely did. She prayed. She wasn't even sure she believed in God, but she prayed anyway that this kid would catch a break. 2 weeks later, when school resumed in January, David was sitting in his usual seat reading. Eleanor felt relief flood through her so strongly she had to steady herself against her desk. After class, David approached her. "My mom found a new job. Better pay. We're staying." Eleanor smiled. "I'm really glad." "Me too," David said. Then he added quietly, "Thank you, Mrs. Chen, for everything." He didn't specify what he was thanking her for. The books, the study sessions, the belief in him. And Eleanor realized it didn't matter. He knew what she'd done and she knew what he was becoming. That understanding passed between them without need for more words. As spring arrived and the school year continued, David blossomed. His grades climbed to the top of the class. He joined the school's book club and started writing his own short stories. Eleanor watched him transform from a scared, quiet kid in an old jacket to a confident young man who walked with his head high. But the best part wasn't his success. It was watching him help others rise too. He became known as the kid who'd help anyone who asked, who'd share his lunch if someone forgot theirs, who'd lend his books without hesitation. Eleanor had planted a seed with a simple gift of books. But David was growing into an entire garden. The last day of 8th grade arrived faster than Eleanor expected. She stood at her classroom door, handing out final report cards and hugging students goodbye. Some she'd see again when they visited from high school. Others would disappear into their lives and she'd wonder forever how they turned out. David was one of the last to leave. He'd stayed to help her clean up the classroom, erasing whiteboards and stacking chairs without being asked. It was classic David, always thinking of others. "Well," Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice steady, "you're off to high school. Are you nervous?" David shook his head. "A little excited, actually. I got accepted into the honors program at Central High." Eleanor beamed. "David, that's wonderful." "I knew you would." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote you something. Don't read it now, though. Wait until I leave, okay?" She took the paper, her throat tight. "Okay, I promise." David stood there for a moment, looking like he wanted to say more. Finally, he stepped forward and hugged her quickly. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen, for seeing me when I felt invisible. I'm going to make you proud." "You already have," Eleanor said, hugging him back. "And David? Keep in touch, okay? Let me know how you're doing." He nodded, but they both knew how these things went. Students meant well, but life moved fast. High school would bring new teachers, new friends, new challenges. Eleanor had taught long enough to know that most students faded away after they left her classroom. After David left, Eleanor sat at her desk and unfolded the paper. His handwriting was careful and neat. "Dear Mrs. Chen, I'm not good with words when I speak, so I'm writing this instead. Before your class, I thought people like me didn't get to have dreams. Poor kids from rough neighborhoods, we were supposed to accept our place and not reach for more. You changed that for me. You gave me books, but you gave me something bigger too. You gave me permission to imagine a different future. I don't know what I want to be yet, but I know I want to help people the way you helped me. Thank you for being the first person who invested in me when I had nothing to give back. I'll never forget you." Eleanor pressed the letter to her chest and let herself cry. These were the moments no one told you about when you became a teacher. The heartbreak of letting them go. The hope that you'd made enough of a difference. Summer passed. Fall arrived. Eleanor started a new school year with new students who needed her. Life continued in its steady rhythm. She thought about David often, especially when she saw students who reminded her of him, kids with hunger in their eyes and holes in their shoes. The school year rolled into the next, and the next. Eleanor heard through the grapevine that David was doing well at Central High. He'd made honor roll every semester. That made her smile, but the updates became less frequent as time went on. Years blended together the way they do when you've been teaching for decades. Eleanor watched the neighborhood around Lincoln Middle School change. Some families moved out, new families moved in. The school got a fresh coat of paint one year, then fell back into disrepair. Budget cuts kept coming. Eleanor kept teaching, kept buying supplies for kids who couldn't afford them, kept staying late for students who needed extra help. She thought about David sometimes, usually when she was particularly tired or discouraged. She wondered if he'd graduated high school, if he'd made it to college. She hoped he had, but she'd learned not to count on happy endings. Life had a way of crushing dreams, especially for kids from poverty. Her own life changed in small ways. Her daughter graduated from college and moved across the country for a job. Eleanor's husband retired. Her hair turned more gray than brown. She started thinking about retirement herself, though the thought scared her. What would she do without her classroom, without her students? 10 years after David left her class, Eleanor was still teaching 7th grade English at Lincoln Middle School. She was 54 now, with reading glasses and joints that ached when it rained. The school had gotten worse. More kids struggling, less money to help them, larger class sizes. Some days she felt like she was trying to hold back an ocean with a paper cup. One afternoon in late October, Eleanor was alone in her classroom grading essays when her phone buzzed. An email from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line read, "You probably don't remember me." She almost deleted it, thinking it was spam. But something made her open it. "Dear Mrs. Chen, this is David Rodriguez. I was in your 7th grade class about 10 years ago. I've thought about reaching out so many times, but I kept telling myself I should wait until I had something impressive to report. Well, I'm done waiting. I need you to know what happened because of you." Eleanor's hand started shaking. She read the entire email twice, then a third time. David had graduated from Central High as valedictorian. He'd earned a full scholarship to State University. He just graduated from law school and passed the bar exam. He was now working as a public defender, representing people who couldn't afford lawyers. "Everything I am today started in your classroom," he wrote. "You were the first person who looked at me and saw potential instead of poverty. I'm writing because I want to meet up if you're willing. I'd love to thank you in person and tell you about something I'm working on. Would you have time for coffee next Saturday?" Eleanor read the email a 4th time, tears streaming down her face. She typed back immediately, her fingers fumbling on the keyboard. Yes, of course, she'd love to meet him. That week crawled by. Eleanor told her husband about the email, about David, about how sometimes the seeds you plant actually do grow into something beautiful. Her husband smiled and said he'd always known she made a difference even when she doubted it. Saturday morning arrived. Eleanor changed her outfit 3 times, laughing at herself for being nervous. She arrived at the coffee shop early and sat by the window, watching people pass by on the street. Then she saw him. David Rodriguez, now 24 years old, walking toward the coffee shop in a suit and tie. He was tall and confident, nothing like the scared 12-year-old in the too small jacket. But when he smiled at her through the window, she saw that same boy, the one who'd breathed in the smell of new books like they were oxygen. They hugged in the doorway, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. Other customers stared, but Eleanor didn't care. This was her student, her David, and he'd made it. They sat down with their coffee, and David told her everything. College had been hard but amazing. Law school had nearly broken him, but he'd pushed through, thinking about her voice telling him he was meant for something bigger. His first case as a public defender had been representing a kid from his old neighborhood, someone who reminded him of himself. "I won that case," David said, his eyes shining. "And afterwards, the kid's mom hugged me and said I'd given her son a second chance. That's when I realized, this is what I'm supposed to do. Give second chances to people the system has given up on." Eleanor wiped her eyes. "David, I'm so proud of you. But you know you did this yourself, right?" "I just gave you some books." David shook his head firmly. "No, Mrs. Chen, you gave me more than books. You gave me hope when hope was the one thing I couldn't afford to buy. You made me believe I deserved good things." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a worn book. Eleanor recognized it immediately. The Giver, the first book she'd given him all those years ago. "I kept this," David said. "I've carried it through everything. Whenever I wanted to quit, I'd open it and read your note. For a mind that's meant to soar. You believed I could soar before I even knew what that meant." They talked for 2 hours, the coffee shop filling and emptying around them. David told her about his plans, his dreams, his hopes. And Eleanor listened, her heart full, thinking about how you never really know which moments will matter. She'd been teaching for 25 years. She'd bought books for dozens of struggling students. She'd stayed late thousands of times. Most of that work disappeared into the universe without acknowledgement, without knowing if it mattered. But sometimes, just sometimes, A student walked back into your life and showed you that every small kindness was worth it. Eleanor thought the coffee shop reunion was the end of the story. A beautiful, perfect ending where she got to see that her work had mattered. She went home that Saturday feeling lighter than she had in years, telling her husband every detail of the conversation. But on Monday morning, her phone rang. It was David. "Mrs. Chen, I know we just met up, but I need to ask you something important. Can I come to your classroom after school today? There's something I want to show you." Eleanor felt a flutter of curiosity mixed with concern. "Of course. Is everything okay?" "Everything's better than okay," David said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I'll explain when I see you." That afternoon, Eleanor straightened up her classroom more than usual. She wasn't sure why she felt nervous. At 3:30, there was a knock on her door. David walked in carrying a leather folder and looking both excited and nervous. He sat down in one of the student desks and Eleanor almost laughed. This successful lawyer folding himself into a 7th grade desk. "So," David began, pulling papers from his folder. "I didn't just want to meet up to say thank you. I mean, I did, but there's more. For the past year, I've been working on something, and I needed to see you before I made it official." He spread the papers across the desk. Eleanor saw legal documents, mission statements, budget projections. "I'm starting a foundation," David said. "It's called the Eleanor Chen Education Fund." Eleanor's breath caught. "What, David? No. You can't. Let me finish," he said gently. "Please." She nodded, her hands clasped tight in her lap. "The foundation will provide books, school supplies, tutoring, and mentorship to underprivileged students in our city. But more than that, it'll connect them with professionals who came from similar backgrounds. Lawyers, doctors, teachers, business owners, people who can show these kids what's possible." David's voice grew stronger as he spoke. "I've already got 5 other lawyers from my firm who want to volunteer as mentors. They all have stories like mine. Someone helped them when they needed it most. And Mrs. Chen, I've raised $60,000 in seed funding from people who believe in this mission." Eleanor couldn't speak. She just stared at him, tears running down her face. "I want you to be on the board of directors," David continued. "Not as some honorary position, but as a real voice in how we help these kids. You know what they need better than anyone. You've been doing this work for decades." "David, I don't know what to say," Eleanor whispered. "Say yes," David said simply. "Say you'll help me turn what you did for me into something bigger. Help me prove that investing in one kid can change everything." Eleanor thought about all the students she'd helped over the years, the books she'd bought with her own money, the supplies she'd provided, the extra hours she'd given. She'd done it all quietly, never expecting recognition, never keeping score. The idea of turning that into something organized, something that could help hundreds of kids instead of just the ones in her classroom, it was overwhelming. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I'll help." David's face broke into a huge grin. He stood up and hugged her, and Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. Maybe her work hadn't been invisible after all. Maybe every small act of kindness she'd performed over 25 years had been building toward this moment. Over the next 3 months, Eleanor attended planning meetings for the foundation. She met David's colleagues, bright, passionate people who shared their own stories of teachers who'd changed their lives. She helped design the application process for students, making sure it was simple enough that struggling families wouldn't be intimidated. The foundation officially launched in January with a ceremony at the city library. Local news reporters showed up. The mayor gave a speech. But the moment that mattered most to Eleanor was when the first 10 students received their book packages. Not just 1 or 2 books, but entire sets chosen specifically for their interests and reading levels. One girl, maybe 13 years old, opened her box and gasped, "These are all mine? To keep?" Eleanor knelt down beside her. "All yours. Forever." The girl clutched the books to her chest, and Eleanor saw herself in that gesture. She saw David breathing in the smell of new pages. She saw every student she'd ever helped, every child who'd ever felt invisible, but David wasn't done surprising her. In March, he knocked on her classroom door again. This time he had a small video crew with him. "I should have warned you," David said apologetically, "but I was afraid you'd say no. I'm documenting the foundation's work, and your story is the heart of it. Would you be willing to talk on camera about why you became a teacher?" Eleanor wanted to refuse. She'd never been comfortable with attention, but she looked at David's hopeful face and thought about the students who might be inspired by hearing her story. "Okay," she said. But just for a few minutes, the interview lasted an hour. Eleanor talked about growing up poor, about teachers who'd helped her, about why she kept teaching even when it was hard. She talked about David, about the day she'd put those books on his desk, about how she'd never expected anything in return. When the video was edited and posted online, something unexpected happened. It went viral. Within a week, 2 million people had watched it. Eleanor's email inbox flooded with messages from former students she hadn't heard from in decades. "Mrs. Chen, you probably don't remember me, but I was in your class in 1998. You bought me notebooks when my family couldn't afford them. I'm a nurse now, and I think about your kindness all the time. I was the kid who struggled with reading. You stayed after school with me for 6 months until I caught up. I'm a high school English teacher now because of you. You gave me a winter coat when mine fell apart. Such a small thing, but it meant the world. Thank you." Eleanor read every message, crying and laughing. She'd had no idea. All those small moments she thought had disappeared into the void. They'd mattered. They'd all mattered. Donations started pouring into the foundation. A retired businessman contributed $50,000. A local bookstore pledged to provide books at cost. Teachers from other schools reached out wanting to know how they could start similar programs. Within 6 months, the Eleanor Chen Education Fund had helped over 200 students. They'd placed mentors with 50 kids who needed guidance. They'd provided tutoring to families who couldn't afford it. They'd given out thousands of books. One afternoon in May, Eleanor was in her classroom when the principal called her to the office. She walked down the hallway wondering if she'd done something wrong, running through possibilities in her mind. When she opened the office door, she found it packed with people. David stood in the center holding a plaque. Her husband was there, tears in his eyes. Linda Martinez, the school counselor, was beaming. Students, both current and former, filled every available space. The superintendent stepped forward. "Eleanor Chen, it is my honor to present you with the District Excellence in Education Award. Your decades of service, your dedication to students, and your impact on this community have been extraordinary." Eleanor accepted the plaque, her hands shaking. But she barely heard the superintendent's words because she was looking at David, remembering the scared boy in the too small jacket, seeing the confident man he'd become. After the ceremony, after the photos and congratulations, David pulled her aside. "There's one more thing," he said. "The foundation has grown faster than I ever imagined. We're expanding to 3 more cities next year. And Mrs. Chen, I want you to consider something. I want you to come work for the foundation full-time. Retire from teaching and help us build this into something that can help thousands of kids." Eleanor looked around her classroom. She'd spent 26 years within these walls. The thought of leaving was terrifying. But the thought of helping more kids like David, of multiplying her impact beyond what she could do alone, that was thrilling. "Let me think about it," she said. That night, Eleanor sat with her husband on their back porch. She told him about David's offer. "What does your heart tell you?" he asked. Eleanor closed her eyes. She thought about all the students she'd never reached, all the kids in other schools who needed someone to believe in them. She thought about how tired she was, how the classroom felt heavier every year. But she also thought about the possibility of doing more, of helping create a system that would outlive her. "I think," she said slowly, "it's time for a new chapter." Eleanor's last day at Lincoln Middle School felt surreal. After 26 years of walking these hallways, of greeting students at her classroom door, of staying late to grade papers, it was ending. Not with sadness exactly, but with a strange mixture of grief and excitement. Her classroom was mostly packed up. Boxes of books lined the walls, waiting to be moved to the foundation's new office downtown. Students kept stopping by between classes, hugging her, telling her they'd miss her. Some cried. Eleanor cried too, but she also smiled because she knew this wasn't really an ending. The school threw her a retirement party in the cafeteria. There was cake and punch and speeches that made her uncomfortable with their praise. But the moment that broke her heart wide open was when her current 7th grade class presented her with a handmade book. Each student had written a page about what she'd meant to them. "You saw me when I felt invisible," one page read. Eleanor recognized that phrase. It was what David had said to her all those years ago. The words had echoed forward, touching another generation. That evening, Eleanor drove home through the city she'd served for decades. She passed the library where David used to spend his afternoons. She passed the bus stop where she'd found him reading, letting buses go by so he could finish another chapter. She passed the school supply store where she'd spent hundreds of dollars of her own money over the years. Tomorrow, she'd start a new chapter. Tomorrow, she'd walk into the Foundation's office as the director of student programs for the Eleanor Chen Education Fund. It still felt strange having something named after her. She'd told David a dozen times that it should be called something else, but he'd refused. "People need to know your name," he'd said. "They need to know that ordinary people doing ordinary kindness can change the world." The Foundation's office was in a renovated building in downtown, nothing fancy but bright and welcoming. On Eleanor's first official day, she arrived early, walking through the space that would now be her workplace. The walls were covered with photos of students they'd already helped, smiling kids holding books, teenagers with their mentors, families at graduation ceremonies. David met her with coffee and a huge grin. "Ready to change some lives?" Eleanor laughed. "I've been doing that for 26 years. I'm ready to do more." They spent the morning going through applications from students who needed help. Eleanor read each one carefully, seeing pieces of David in every story. A girl whose family had been evicted and was living in a shelter, but who'd never missed a day of school. A boy who took care of his younger siblings while his single dad worked nights but still managed to maintain honor roll. A teenager who'd taught herself coding from library computers because her school didn't offer computer science classes. "We can help this one," Eleanor said, pointing to an application. "And this one. And definitely this one." "That's 15 students," David said gently. "Our budget this quarter was for 10. Eleanor looked at him over her reading glasses. "Then we need to raise more money." "We're not telling any of these kids no, David. Not if we can help it," David smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've got some donors I can call." By the end of their first week working together, they'd expanded the program to include all 15 students. By the end of the first month, they'd hired 2 more staff members and opened applications for a summer mentorship program. By the end of the first year, the Eleanor Chen Education Fund had helped over 500 students across 4 cities. But numbers didn't capture what was really happening. Eleanor saw it in the thank you letters that arrived weekly. She saw it in the photos mentors sent of their students graduating, heading to college, starting careers. She saw it in the faces of parents who cried with relief because someone was finally helping their kids. One afternoon, 18 months after Eleanor had started at the foundation, a young woman walked into their office. She was maybe 19, wearing a university sweatshirt, and she looked nervous. "Can I help you?" Eleanor asked. The young woman's eyes widened. "Are you Eleanor Chen?" "The actual Eleanor Chen?" "That's me," Eleanor said, slightly embarrassed. She still wasn't used to being recognized. "I'm Patricia Gomez. You gave my older brother books when he was in 7th grade. He was in your class about 15 years ago." Eleanor tried to place the name, but after hundreds of students, the memories blurred together. "I'm sorry, I don't remember." "That's okay," Patricia interrupted. "He probably wouldn't expect you to, but he never forgot. He told me the story over and over growing up. How you saw he was struggling and helped him without making him feel ashamed. He became a teacher because of you, Mrs. Chen. He teaches 4th grade now in the same neighborhood where we grew up." Eleanor felt her eyes filling with tears. This kept happening. People appearing from her past, telling her she'd mattered to them, showing her the ripples she'd created without knowing it. "I'm here because I want to volunteer," Patricia continued. "I'm studying education at State University, and I want to be a mentor for the foundation. I want to do for other kids what you did for my brother." Eleanor hired her on the spot. The foundation continued to grow. 3 years after Eleanor retired from teaching, they were operating in 12 cities and had helped over 2,000 students. Major corporations started partnering with them. A famous author donated the rights to one of her books, with all proceeds going to the foundation. A movie production company approached them about telling David's story. But Eleanor's favorite part wasn't the big donations or the media attention. It was the small moments. The day a shy boy received his first book package and whispered "thank you," so quietly she almost didn't hear it. The afternoon, a teenager who'd been failing every class showed up to meet her mentor and left with hope in her eyes. The evening, a mother called just to say her daughter was reading for the first time in her life because of the books they'd provided. On the 5-year anniversary of the foundation's launch, they held a celebration. The event space was packed with students, families, mentors, donors, and supporters. David gave a speech about how one teacher's belief in him had changed everything. Eleanor stood beside him holding his hand, watching the crowd of hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by ripples that started with 6 books and a simple note. During his speech, David turned to her. "Mrs. Chen taught me that small acts of kindness aren't small at all. They're seeds. And seeds, when planted in good soil and given the right care, grow into forests." The crowd erupted in applause. Eleanor looked out at all those faces, students she'd taught, students the foundation had helped, teachers inspired by her story, and people she'd never met who'd been moved to help others. Later that evening, after most people had left, Eleanor found herself in a quiet corner with David and Linda Martinez, her old friend from Lincoln Middle School who now served on the foundation's board. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't given David those books?" Linda asked. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "I think about all the times I almost didn't. I almost convinced myself I couldn't afford it. I almost talked myself out of it thinking it was too small a gesture to matter. But you didn't," David said softly. "You did it anyway. You know what I've learned?" Eleanor said, looking between them. "I spent 26 years teaching, thinking most of my work disappeared into nothing, thinking I was just one person trying to hold back an ocean. But I was wrong. Every student I helped, every book I bought, every extra hour I stayed late, it all mattered. Not because it was big or dramatic, but because it was consistent. Because I kept showing up." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought I was just planting seeds in darkness, never knowing if they'd grow. But I was building a garden the whole time, and now that garden has gardeners of its own, planting even more seeds." David pulled out something from his jacket pocket. It was that same worn copy of The Giver, the first book Eleanor had given him. He opened it to the note she'd written 15 years ago. "For a mind that's meant to soar," he read aloud. "You gave me permission to dream, Mrs. Chen, and now we're giving thousands of kids that same permission." Eleanor looked around the event space. On the walls were photos of students reading, learning, growing. Each one a story, each one a seed that had sprouted. Each one proof that ordinary people doing ordinary kindness could change the entire world. She'd spent her career wondering if she was making a difference. Now she knew the answer wasn't about what you could see or measure. It was about showing up day after day for people who needed someone to believe in them. It was about giving what you could, when you could, without expecting anything back. Because sometimes, 20 years later, a student walks back into your life and shows you that every small moment of kindness was building toward something beautiful. Eleanor Chen had retired from teaching, but she'd never stopped being a teacher. She'd never stopped planting seeds. And now with the foundation, she had a whole team of gardeners helping those seeds grow into forests. The work wasn't finished. It would never be finished. But standing there that evening, surrounded by the evidence of what compassion and consistency could build, Eleanor knew one thing for certain. It was all worth it. Every single moment.